Welcome, everyone. I'm Jack Llewellyn, and this is Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I am an attorney. I'm an author. I'm an investigator and a researcher, and I have been working on matters relating to Mexican cartels, including, in particular, the Kiki Camarena case, but certainly not limited to that case, for about the last 35 years. I want to give a big shout out to people who've been following my podcast, same name, and invite them over to the YouTube channel and invite the YouTubers over to the podcast channel. We're going to have them going on simultaneously. Similar topics, kind of different themes, but I think of interest to both groups of people. Today, we're going to talk primarily about the capture of Ovidio Guzman in Culiacan this week. But before we do that, I want to set a few parameters and a few expectations for not just today's video, but all of the videos going forward. So number one of the things that I did when I started the podcast channel 6, 7, 8 months ago was to say I wanted to apply some set of intellectual honesty, academic rigor, intellectual consistency to the discussions about the Camarena case and then the broader discussions about cartels in general, drug trafficking, cross-border policy, all of that. And so one of the things you're going to see in the videos going forward is a strict adherence to, we're going to talk about facts. But if we say something that's a fact, it's a verifiable fact. If we're speculating, we're going to tell you, okay? Now, number two, though, that doesn't mean we can't speculate. It just means you have to have a baseline. You got to have a foundation of facts. Then you can have the intellectual fun part. Then you can start asking yourself, what does it mean? What's going to happen going forward? What are the motivations? All of those sorts of things that are fascinating and interesting and fun to talk about. All of that can be done, but you got to have the facts first. One of the things that's going to be really important is we're going to talk about social media. The Guzman case from the last couple of days shows in perfect form. I mean, we should study this, but shows the good and the bad of social media. One of the bad things about social media, of course, is that things get repeated over and over and over, sometimes verbatim, that are just wrong. People don't have to put their name attached to it. They don't have to cite to anything. And so you'll see things repeated over and over that simply are not true. Great example, this week I saw dozens, if not 100 posts talking about Rafael Caro having escaped from prison. Didn't happen. And it wasn't, hey, this might have happened. It was, did you hear about this type of thing? We're also going to talk, when we talk about the Guzman escape, though, about some really fascinating things that social media does bring, some real-time communication that is really interesting. So what I want to establish is we're going to use social media, but we're going to do it in a smart way. We're still going to go back to that academic rigor, that intellectual honesty. The other thing that we're going to do in these videos is, look, any of us can read the news, right? We don't necessarily pick up newspapers like we used to, but we can go on Yahoo or MSN or CNN and kind of get the basic facts about what happened. We're going to talk a lot about why something happened, what it means. And that goes back to that speculation. But that's the intellectually curious part. But in order to do that, we have to set some facts and some ground rules as far as the events we're talking about. You'll see that today, I think, as we go forward. And then the last thing is we're not going to try to be all things to all people and answer all questions, at the beginning. There are lots of things that are going to lead to speculation. There's going to be open questions. I've been working on the Camarena case since 1990. I continue to ask questions. I sent a question to a former DEA agent today dealing with that case. So we're not going to answer everything. We're not going to try to. We're not going to purport that we're going to have, the insight that solves all questions and answers all issues. So that's the foundation for this YouTube channel going forward and for all of our discussions. Now let's talk about what happened this week. So last Thursday morning, talking local time, Culiacan, Sinaloa, right? The Culiacan Rosales, I think is the official name. About 4 a.m., military operations started, and it was in an area, a neighborhood of Jesus Maria. Okay, about 4:40 a.m., there were reports of gunshots, helicopters, etc., occurring. What we know is in that operation, Ovidio Guzman, son of Chapo Guzman, one of Los Chapitos, and as you know, Los Chapitos being one faction of the Sinaloa Cartel, but Ovidio was captured by Mexican military, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. And then he was flown to Mexico City, where he's being held at the Altiplano high security prison just outside of Mexico City. A few things about this raid and things that are interesting. In this particular raid, and this is from government reports themselves and press conferences, it appears that the Army was the main military group involved in this operation. Normally, and if you go back, and even if you just think a couple months ago, go back to the capture of Rafael Caro Quintero, it was the Marines that were the primary military element. And so there is a question, is there a reason for that? Is that a difference that means something? I don't necessarily have a good answer for it, but think about that as you hear things going forward. There are reports that the Air Force was involved, National Guard was involved. Some people have said up to 900 people were involved in kind of the initial operations. Clearly, that's not all in the raid. That was on a lot of security and things. There's also, of course, the speculation that if there were the 900 people involved in the operation in some way, shape, or form, the vast, vast majority of them were not aware of what they were doing until well after Guzman was captured, right? That otherwise, the ability for bad guys to get noticed and find out what's going on goes up dramatically. So 900 people, lots of military involved, but the people in the know at the beginning and in connection with the capture of Guzman probably were much, much smaller. So far, government reports have said 10 soldiers were killed, 35 were wounded, 19 sicarios were killed, 21 were arrested. The government has said that no civilians were killed in connection with the raid. I think we need to be very clear about what that means. In direct connection with the raid, maybe not. But Culiacan was a city under siege almost immediately after this happened. Sicarios were out in force. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And there certainly are reports of civilian casualties in connection with those after effects. So if the government is saying there were no civilian casualties, that's limited, I think, to just the raid itself. Shortly after Guzman was picked up, flown to Mexico City, and we'll talk about that too, because that's fascinating in just a second. As I said, the Sinaloa Cartel went pretty crazy, locked down Culiacan in a number of ways. In response, at least another 1,000 military personnel were brought into the city to try and restore some sense of order. One thing that I do think is important is in a press conference, President López Obrador has particularly and expressly said that no U.S. forces were involved in or assisted with Ovidio's capture. Now, one of the things I think is interesting is the word that was used was assisted in, right? Not just that they weren't involved, but he said they didn't assist in. And I always look at for particular language. I don't think any of us believe that the DEA or other elements of U.S. military didn't have something to do with locating Guzman and with providing that information to Mexican military. But it's interesting that AMLO specifically said they didn't assist. And again, we would only be speculating at this point to know to what extent they, in fact, were involved. Culiacan's airport was shut down yesterday. Some great social media video of gunfights in the airport. There was an Aeromexico plane that apparently got caught in the crossfire as a plane was leaving, apparently with Guzman going to Mexico City. There were actual gunfights on the tarmac, and bullets hit, or at least came close to, a civilian Aeromexico plane. Lots of crazy things that way. There were some videos from a reporter, I want to get his name right, Gildo Garza, who had pictures of a security personnel who had been injured in one of the gunfights. He was on a Boeing 737 that was transporting, we think, Guzman to Mexico City. Again, it was an Aeromexico 165. That was the name of the flight that had the issues. Okay, so here's some really cool things. This is the social media part that I think was just fascinating to watch. Planes can be tracked, right? And planes can be tracked in the U.S. I can find out what Southwest flight is flying across Colorado right now if I know the site to go to. Same in Mexico. And a lot of amateur folks got on these flight tracking and were able to watch really carefully where these flights were going. And the problem, of course, is it wasn't always consistent. So you had some people tracking a 737 that went to Mexico City and landed. You had some people tracking a 737 that went to Juarez and landed and refueled and then went to Mexico City. You had reports of a plane that actually went into the United States and landed someplace near San Diego. That, I think, is... Forget about that one. That one I don't buy. Then one of the things that was really interesting is after the raid, there was a Beechcraft, and I'm looking at my notes to make sure I get it right. There was a Beechcraft King Air 350 twin prop plane that took off from an airport just outside of Culiacan, and it spent a couple of hours circling the area around Culiacan, particularly in the area of Jesus Murillo, which is where Guzman was found. And it said that this became the most tracked flight in the world. And you can actually see printouts of the location and everything. So what's interesting is, all right, you have the raid, Guzman gets captured, they put him on a 737, that heads to Mexico City, another plane, a smaller plane, takes off and starts circling the area around where Guzman had been. What is the reason for that? Well, we don't know, but speculation is, what if there was another high-profile target there that got away? What if in the raid they were expecting not just Ovidio, but another one of Los Chapitos or somebody else? And was that plane, that Beechcraft, then circling around trying to assist in locating this other target? If there is another target, what does that mean for future activities going forward and things? If you go on to flightradar24.com, you can look up this particular plane and see its pattern and what it did and stuff. Very interesting. Again, the good and the bad of social media, right? Lots of speculation, lots of people saying different things, but also some facts being shown in real time that we never would have had, even just a couple of years ago. All right. Cartels Response. Cartel, as we said, really took to action on the streets of Culiacan. Various things happening in Culiacan, including at the airport. Some reports of gunfire, fire bombings, etc. In particular, though, the cartel came out and said, all right, we're giving you 72 hours. Release him, or we're going to get aggressive against the government. And, we can talk about what that might mean. We're not there yet, right? This was Thursday. We're now talking on Saturday. We're talking, we got a day or so to see what happens. News reports out of Culiacan on Saturday, unfortunately, have been much less frequent, less complete than they were on Friday. And so kind of how the city is dealing with things at the moment is a little bit of speculation, so we're not going to go there. But what we do know is that there was a very aggressive pushback by the cartel and a very express warning by the cartel to the government. And we're going to talk in just a minute about kind of what that might mean going forward. Okay, Friday morning, Guzman has a proceeding in court. Now, again, they do it a little bit differently, but there a Mexican judge put a kibosh on extraditing Guzman to the U.S. pursuant to a warrant that apparently has been out since 2019. Right? They said, number one, no extradition. That's halted. Number two, there had been some type of a ruling or a measure, a security measure, saying that Guzman couldn't communicate with his family or his legal team. The judge said no to that. One thing that was interesting is after the extradition, was halted. This is exactly what happened with Caro Quintero too. After the extradition was halted, there will be a process. But one of the things that the Mexican government has said in a couple of different statements is, hey, don't forget there are warrants against Guzman in Mexico, and we may want to, try him on those charges well before anything happens in the United States. Okay, and if you listen to the podcast, we talked about that with respect to Caro Quintero too. Is there a possibility that the government, wants to get him, gets the good press for actually taking him into custody, but then says, hey, as opposed to actually extraditing them, we are going to try them here. And there's various reasons why that may or may not be, depending on the person and the timing. So nothing is going to happen in the short term on extradition. Just like Caro Quintero, just like El Chapo. El Chapo, it took more than a year for him to actually be extradited. So we'll watch that process a little bit. The timing is interesting. Why? Because next week, there's a summit in Mexico City, North American leaders. So you've got Trudeau from Canada, President Biden, President López Obrador, all meeting in Mexico City. If you go back to Caro Quintero's arrest, that July 15 of this year, that was within days of López Obrador being in the White House talking to President Biden. And now you've got another meeting coming up, and here is another high-profile arrest and capture. And it can't be a coincidence, right? What does it really mean? What's the reasoning for it? I don't know. It's speculation. Okay, we're gonna speculate. We're gonna think out loud. Some have surmised that this is really just a way of throwing a bone to President Biden in advance of meetings or in connections with meetings. AMLO can now sit down with Biden in Mexico City and say, hey, look at all that we've done. We've gotten one of Los Chapitos. Rafael Caro Quintero is in jail. Yep, we are working really hard. Okay, got to tell you, if you're a drug dealer, if you're a big name drug dealer, drug trafficker, cartel leader in Mexico, I look at AMLO's calendar and I say, if he's going to meet with Biden anytime, I am hiding low. I am staying low when that happens. Don't go nowhere. Okay, there's clearly a little bit of a connection there. All right, let's talk about what this means. What does Ovidio's arrest mean? Number one, I think almost everybody who looks at this agrees that of Los Chapitos, he is the least important. Probably had less to do with the day-to-day operations of any portion of the Sinaloa Cartel. You can read some disparaging comments, maybe not the brightest or the hardest working of the brothers. So the impact that his arrest will or might have on the operations of the Sinaloa Cartel or the Los Chapitos faction is probably somewhat mooted. But it's a disruption, right? So even if he's not the most important, he still has a role. He still has a function. He has people who are with him. He has others who were arrested. So it's going to take a little bit of time to see how all that plays out and to what extent there's any real disruption in the Sinaloa Cartel. Keep in mind that cartel has been around for a very long time. One of the things that we talked about in a recent podcast is how, because of the split between Los Chapitos and El Chapo faction and El Mayo faction in the Sinaloa Cartel, unlike a lot of other cartels that have a kind of a vertical structure, if you want to think of CJNG as having a vertical structure, it may well be that the Sinaloa Cartel has more of a horizontal structure. And as a result, if you pull out little pieces, it may not affect the overall structure as much. And as I said, this has been around for a long time, so there's a lot of infrastructure. There's lots of little groups and things associated with it. So the impact to the cartel itself may be minimal. Now, here's two areas of rank speculation. One, actually, I'm going to put them together. All right, we'll talk about them at the same. There have been different activities in different parts of Mexico recently that have led some to believe that the Sinaloa Cartel had a little bit of what I'll call a favored nation status with the military. That being that the government had decided that CDS was the lesser of competing evils between, especially CJNG, but some other groups within Nuevo Laredo. There had been speculation that some of the factions, the remnants of the Gulf Cartel and things in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, that the government was allowing CDS to take more and more control and kind of facilitating that. So, if that's the case, what does Guzman's capture this week mean? Is there some type of a broken deal between the government and CDS? Now, there could be a broken deal that some people in the government don't know about, right? The mere fact that that somebody in the military might have made a deal with Los Chapitos or with El Mayo or with all of them doesn't mean that everybody was aware of it. But from the cartel perspective, do they think that there was a deal that was made that was in place that has now been breached? And if so, what's going to be their reaction? And just that idea of a favored nation status, is this signaling a shift in policy, a shift in philosophy, or is this simply a byproduct of, again, the need to capture somebody to maintain international relations? The one other thing that might be interesting is to see how this relates to, or how this impacts, the schism between Los Chapitos and El Mayo, the two different groups. And the easiest way to think about it for me is, I can beat up my brother, but if you touch him, I'm going to kick your ass, right? There are reports I've seen this morning of lots of activity in Zacatecas where factions from sicarios from Los Chapitos and El Niles group working together in some direct efforts against CJNG and against the government. So, does this have any impact on solving over the scar tissue between those two groups? Don't know, but that's something we want to look for, we want to think about going forward. Okay, so that's the main news from this week. But there was one other thing that happened earlier in the week that I want to talk about real quickly. So on January 1st, there was a prison break in Ciudad Juarez in the state of Chihuahua, Ciudad Juarez being right across the border from El Paso. And there were, 21? I think it was 21 people who were broken out of jail. It was a brazen raid on the jail. There was something along the lines of 19 security personnel, prison guards that were murdered. The other thing about social media is you can see some pictures you really don't want to see. But the importance of this, not only just the brazenness of it, but one of the people who was released or escaped during this raid was somebody by the name of El Neto, who was the leader of the group, which we'll call Los Mexicles, which was a cell of the Sinaloa Cartel, really was in control of Ciudad Juarez. Apparently, he had a VIP suite in the prison, had been running operations from his prison office, so to speak. And in response, the government went looking for these folks. There ended up being a gunfight on the streets of Ciudad Juarez. El Neto was actually killed in that gunfight at an OXXO station. Again, you can see pictures of him being mortally wounded. Again, this one is a fascinating story and one to bring up. Because El Neto was fairly important and fairly significant, especially within the confines of Ciudad Juarez. Also because we want to continue to look and evaluate the nature of the actions of the cartels, right? How brazen are they? Remember back a couple months ago, we had lots of things happening in Tijuana. We had things in Nuevo Laredo. I think they're a good barometer for relations and for projections going forward is the degree to which the cartels and the groups think that they can act with some sort of impunity. And raiding a Mexican prison, killing prison guards, was a brazen attack and really significant. So we want to look at that. All right. That is our video for today. I would love comments. Talk to me about Guzman, what it's going to mean going forward. Talk to me about what else you would like to hear on this channel. We're going to do a lot of things, I promise. We're going to have a lot of guests. We're going to talk about some interesting things. Communicate with me. Let me know. Also, go back, look at the podcast. I've got a newsletter as well. And as always, if you like this, if you thought you got something interesting out of it, subscribe, and then you'll be in line for the next ones. So thank you, and take care, everyone.